Hello and welcome to our podcast through the University of Kansas Medical Center. My name is Angela Carrasco, and joining us today we have Dr. Mindy Bridges, Assistant Professor for the Intercampus Program in Communicative Disorders at the University of Kansas Medical Center. She previously served as a research scientist at the University of Kansas in the Lifespan Institute, and prior to that she was a practicing speech-language pathologist for 6 years. Broadly, her research interests include the connection between language and reading development. Dr. Bridges currently is the co-investigator of a large NICHD-funded grant examining reading comprehension in upper elementary students and serves as the principal investigator of a grant examining reading comprehension in middle school. Prior research has examined reading comprehension assessment and instruction in preschool through primary grades, as well as the use of response to intervention in young children. Mindy, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
What exactly brought you to the University of Kansas?
Well, I was a practicing speech pathologist in the Kansas City metro area prior to starting my doctoral program at the University of Kansas. I looked at many universities across the country, but chose the University of Kansas for one, their very strong program overall, including the child language program at KU, but also my mentor, Dr. Hugh Katz, who's now in Florida State University, was here at the time. He's a leading expert in reading, particularly reading comprehension and the connection between language and reading, so I was really excited when I had the opportunity to work with him. Receiving my doctoral degree, I was able to continue to work on grants through the Lifespan Institute as a research scientist, and in 2017, I joined the faculty in a tenure track position here at the University of Kansas Medical Center. So it's been a really good journey for me across the years.
Great. Please tell us a little bit about your Reading, Language, and Learning Lab.
So one of the most exciting things for me in receiving this tenure track position was starting my own lab. So picking a name was really hard. There's a lot of really clever acronyms out there, and I'm not good at that, so hence my name. Our lab really is comprised of a number of people. I have my first student who started this year who's interested in quite a few things. I think she'll head toward looking at the connection between morphological awareness and later reading comprehension. I have a project director who works for me, and then I have about 8 to 10 students, depending on the year, that work with me on various different research projects or working on the specific grant-related projects. As I said, or as you said, actually, Angela, I have 2 grants right now that I'm working on that were funded by NICHD. Both of them are really looking at reading comprehension in older students. So we've really been focused on reading, primarily decoding actually, with young children for many years, and we're really starting to understand that reading comprehension is a little bit of a different story. It's more complex, and it's really hard to move students' reading comprehension abilities. So I have been fortunate enough to receive funding to work on grants that look at reading comprehension in 6th grade and 8th grade students. These are students, kind of upper elementary and adolescents, haven't been studied as well or as often as younger students. Both of these grants are really looking at what does reading comprehension basically look like in these older grades? So what indicators or factors make up reading comprehension? Is it vocabulary? Is it motivation? Is it syntax? We obviously know it's a combination of some of these things, plus many other things, but this grant really is hoping to define the factor of reading comprehension more succinctly. We also have some kiddos that we've been following since preschool, where we tested them on a lot of different measures related to language, reading, cognition, executive functioning, and we've currently received data on them from 6th grade, and we're going to follow them to 8th grade, and so we'll be able to also say what things predict later reading comprehension. So what things early on, if you test children or observe children in preschool and kindergarten, what things might indicate that they're going to struggle with reading comprehension in later years. So that's been really exciting. I also have a number of side projects in my lab. So I've worked with Debbie Daniels, who's a faculty member in our department. We've developed some reading interventions looking at language, specifically vocabulary and narrative language for preschool children, and we've completed some pilot studies at Head Start looking to see if we can raise some language skills in students who are at risk for later reading. I also have done a little bit of work on dynamic assessment of reading, so looking to see if there's some alternate ways to assess reading that more accurately captures students' ability to learn under construction, under good instruction. So we really have a lot going on in our lab, and have a couple more grants and collaborations that I'm hoping to continue in the coming years.
I cannot understand how you can juggle so much at one time.
It's a lot of caffeine.
So Mindy, you've given us a broad picture, but what does your day-to-day look like, and what type of research do you conduct?
So my day-to-day varies broadly, which is one of the reasons I both love this job and also find myself stressed in the middle of the night sometimes thinking about it. My day-to-day is really varied because obviously besides research, I now have responsibilities related to mentoring and student advising and teaching classes, for instance. But right now my day-to-day is related to research, is really trying to recruit and maintain data collection for these 6th and 8th graders. So I'm out there kind of actively in school districts trying to receive permission to consent students to participate in our study. We finished our first round of data collection for the 6th graders just this spring. So we're cleaning data, post-scoring things that need a little bit more time than can be scored in the field, which is what a lot of my students are working on. And then, like I said, I'm also consistently writing and thinking about how to further investigate and get funding to either probe into this more or kind of go in a few other directions. So it's really varied, and it's why I love my job.
Awesome. With all of this that you have going on, are you able to collaborate with researchers in other states or countries?
I have been incredibly lucky in my career, both as a student and as a research scientist and a professor now, assistant professor in the department. I have really active collaborations in the current grants with Arizona State University and Lancaster University in England. Unfortunately, we don't do any data collection or meetings in England. We keep it here.
That's too bad.
It is too bad. I also have some collaborations with individuals from Ohio State University based on some past grant research that I completed. So I'm looking to submit a grant with folks from there. And then I still work with, for instance, my old advisor, Hugh Katz. We collaborate on some things along with some of the doc students who I got my Ph.D. with. We continue to do some work together and do some presentations. So I've really been lucky and have been fortunate to learn from so many people that are really doing excellent work.
How do those educators take that research and put it into practice?
So my research is very application or practitioner driven. So even though my grants, for instance, right now are somewhat more of a basic science in that we're really trying to pinpoint down a model of reading comprehension and what factors structure that looks like for 6th and 8th grade, I really want this research to have direct application. So for instance, from the 6th and 8th grade research, I would love for our findings to serve as a basis for developing assessments and developing interventions that practitioners can go out and use in the field. A lot of my research is trying to not only develop interventions that work in schools or in practical settings, but also if they don't work, what is keeping them from working? It's often the case in intervention research that the research is not implemented with fidelity, meaning that the people who are implementing it aren't implementing it as it was written. And sometimes what we develop and write for practitioners is maybe not teacher-friendly, for instance, or maybe won't fit into their regular school day, or maybe they just don't have some of that background knowledge about vocabulary or syntax that we are hoping that they have and what's necessary for them to have to implement what we do. So I'm also really interested in some of the professional development issues surrounding how to implement reading comprehension intervention in a way that's really going to affect change in young children. So I am really active in working with school districts around the Kansas City metro area and actually beyond in terms of really providing professional development and guidance on how to take interventions that are already out there and make them more able to fit into a school day. And also I really like to get input from teachers and educators and clinicians on what kinds of things are impeding their use of things that we know work.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you might have quite a few to tell me, but what would you call your greatest professional accomplishment?
So I really think for me, what I'm proudest about, or what I feel has been the thing that I've done the best so far, is really foster the collaborations that I have with other researchers. All of the grants that I've worked on have been multiple site grants. So they've all been multiple people from often different professions, definitely not just speech pathology. So linguistics or early childhood education or lots of methodologists. I really think that I have learned so much from these strong collaborations. And I also think it just makes for better science when you have multiple people kind of looking at things from different points of views. I think people find holes or strengths in something that maybe I wasn't aware of. So I think I'm most proud of that because I think it's made the work that I do better. And I also, it's been more fun. So it's made what I do just a really great process. I go to conferences now and see some of my just best friends that live in DC or live in Columbus, Ohio, or live in Boston. And it's a really great feeling to know that that's part of my professional work.
And that fits in really well with the University of Kansas's mission right now, where they're really trying to promote interprofessional education.
Mm-hmm. It also is really, it's a very strong push across most funding agencies is intercollaborative work. So it's not the case anymore that they want to see even single author grants or single author papers. They're really pushing individuals to collaborate across sites and across disciplines. And again, that makes sense for science. The last large grant I was involved in was the Language and Reading Research Consortium, otherwise lovingly known as LARC. And this was a 5-year federally funded grant funded by Institute of Education Sciences. It started as a 5-site grant, and then a couple of the investigators moved, and it ended up being a 7-site grant that looked at reading comprehension, assessment, and intervention from preschool through 3rd grade. And we had about I lose track, but I think there were 15 investigators on that grant, wow, which sometimes was a nightmare in terms of scheduling conference calls because we went across the coast to coast and into England. But it really just, that large group of individuals from very, very diverse educational backgrounds and diverse sites across the country really just made that project stronger.
That is an excellent accomplishment. Mindy, not only are you involved in federally funded research, but you also work to increase female representation in education research through the organization you co-founded, POWER. Tell us about POWER.
So POWER, which is an acronym, because everything in education in general has to have an acronym, right, stands for Providing Opportunities for Women in Educational Research. And really, POWER was conceptualized about 3 years ago over dinner at a conference with some of these friends and colleagues that I was talking about previously. We were all just talking about where we were in our career. At that time, most of us were definitely early or maybe middle stage in our career, and just talking about some of the challenges that faced us in terms of moving forward in our career, and also that although there's a lot of women in this field in general, most of the leading experts and in some ways the loudest voices in educational research belong to men. Mm-hmm. So we really wanted to think of a way to kind of find a way to empower women, provide support for women, and just find a way for women to connect with each other in terms of, for instance, figuring out what grants or awards are out there, providing information about mentorship and how to find a good mentor. One of the reasons that we had this conversation in this group came up was really based on funding disparities in NIH, for instance, and that many of the grants are awarded to men, even though we know that there's many women in this field. So we have a website, womeninedresearch.com. This website has multiple components to it. You can sign up and join POWER. You don't have to be a woman or identify as being a woman to be a member of POWER, and there's multiple things you can find there. You can find, for instance, just a database of women across the country and across the world with some information about the type of research they do. So for instance, if you were interested in doing something that would include some math research and that's not your field and you wanted to look to see who's out there, you could look at that database. We also have some information, like I said, about just mentoring and finding ways for women to support each other and use their voices. So we're still really in our very infant stages. We have a planning meeting in January, but it's just been a really exciting and, from the response that we've received from people, much needed place to go, I think.
Well, I think when you were talking about the number of collaborators you've had on some of these research grants, that's a great first start is for someone to see this database of individuals that are doing research to get an idea of who would be someone good to work with on this grant.
Yeah.
So that's a great resource.
We had our first networking event at a reading conference this last summer in Brighton, and we had upwards of 75 people, women and a few men, come, and there was a lot of really great connections made even that night. So we will continue to try and have these networking events as we go to conferences that have a lot of women who do this type of research. So like I said, we're just really starting to the beginning stages of trying to think about where this would where this will go, but we're really excited about it. And again, from the feedback that we've heard from individuals across the country, it's something that's needed.
And you alluded to the fact that being a woman in higher education is a potential roadblock. But what other obstacles must one consider when conducting research in higher education?
I think particularly in my field, so when you're thinking about education research in general, I think obviously money.
Right.
Obtaining grant funding is getting increasingly difficult. But I think also in my field, I'm really interested in some long-term changes. And so it's really hard to receive funding, for instance, to do an intervention and then follow those children or those students longer. So sometimes it's an empirical question of whether in an intervention the results will only happen afterward, or if there's some changes and some things that might occur as a follow-up. And it's really hard to get granting or funding agencies to allow research to kind of follow that. So I think, just obtaining any kind of grant funding is increasingly difficult, but I think also some of the research that folks out there are doing that really want to do some maintenance or follow-up it's really hard to get people to buy into that.
I can imagine. You and your husband have gotten involved locally in the community. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my husband Justin and I are both transplants to Kansas City. I'm from Iowa and he's from Jefferson City, but we've lived in Kansas City for years. And we have really just made it our home. It's such a great place to live, but it's also just so strong in philanthropy. So people in Kansas City, and this is known across the country, are really known to give time and money. We have a daughter that has a rare disease, and so we've become very involved with the local hospital, Children's Mercy, where she receives her care. In fact, the year she was born, we started an endowment in her name, and we have raised about $140,000 over the last 4 years just from holding one kind of fairly informal fundraiser a year. Next year's our 5 years, so we're really excited, our 5-year anniversary, to see what we can do. We recently chaired a large March of Dimes event in Kansas City called the Signature Chefs event, which raises money for March of Dimes. Our daughter was also premature, born almost a little over 2 months premature, and so that's kind of an organization close to our heart. And that was really exciting. And then we've just done a lot of other types of philanthropy. My husband is really involved has been really involved in Habitats for Humanity. I just started serving on the board of Rare KC, which is a local organization that's really trying to make Kansas City kind of a center of excellence for the care, treatment, and research for individuals with rare diseases. So we really feel pretty blessed and just love being a part of our community and trying to make our community better for everyone else.
Well, it definitely sounds like you are. Thank you for all you've done. And it sounds like between what you do professionally and all the volunteer work you do in the community, I don't know how you had time to do today's podcast, but do you have any favorite podcasts or blogs that you're following?
I do. I actually listen to podcasts all the time. And one of my favorite podcasts that I've just recently listened to that's very close to what I do professionally was by Emily Hamford. It's on the APM reports, and it's called Hard Words: Why Aren't Our Kids Being Taught to Read? She does an amazing 1 to 2 hour podcast about how much we know about reading instruction that is research-based and works, and how many people in this country still aren't teaching in the way that we know works, and how many of our kids are struggling for no reason because of this. And then for fun, I listen to a lot of random silly ones about books and things, but I love It's Been a Minute by Sam Sanders. He has 2 podcasts a week. He just chats with folks. He plays some silly games. But on Fridays, he does something called The Best Thing That Happened to Me This Week. And he has callers call in and he kind of makes a conglomeration, like 2 minutes of it. And I seriously ugly cry every time I hear it because there's just some of the most uplifting stories. And it's kind of a nice way to end the week. And I feel like things are so crazy in the world right now. It's a nice way to think of positive, happy things.
You bet. Well, speaking of positive, happy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and your extensive knowledge on the subject of reading comprehension. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, I'm thrilled to share some things.
Great. To our listeners, that was Dr. Mindy Bridges, Assistant Professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Thank you for listening.